hard to believe that 40 years ago I was coming down this road with 5 or 6 trucks behind me loaded with farmers. It was so foggy you couldn't hardly see. We come driving down this road, and the road there, all the trucks that were not in behind me had come down the night before, so we wouldn't have a lot of congestion on the highway. I drove up, I pulled into the gate, and the FBI and the federal marshals and a lot of the law enforcement, they were standing in lines, one behind the other. And I pulled up and shut the truck off. I'd set the deadline for 10 o'clock, and it was about 9:30, so we had 30 minutes to sit there. And then when the time was up, I started the truck real slow and drove towards the line of law enforcement officers, and just as I got to them, they just parted out of the way. I drove in on the scales, weighed, and then I drove all the way back to the first bin there, and the farmers had already opened it up and had it set up with a vacuumator. Started loading my truck, and as soon as it was full, I pulled the truck back out around, weighed, they took samples out of the truck, and then I pulled right up to there and shut the truck off.
It's my distinct honor and pleasure to welcome Wayne Cryts to Very Interesting. Wayne, thank you for coming. I've been excited about having you on this show for a long time. February 16th was the 40th anniversary of the Ristine elevator. Fiasco, crisis, it's according to what side of the fence you're on, right? But anyway, it's the 40th anniversary. You're in good health. We're here to reflect on 40 years of when you made that day famous. It was President's Day.
Right.
And you said it was a foggy day.
Very foggy.
In 1981.
Right.
First, Wayne, let's just talk about your family. They're going to be here with us today. Terry and Paula, tell us a little bit about your family, where you grew up and where you're from.
Right. Well, I grew up south of Dexter. Our families lived there for 5 generations in the area. Grew up in the days when they had one-room schoolhouses. I went 2 years to a one-room, and then it converted into a 2-room, consolidated. And so, you know, I was just a typical farm kid. Had chores to do, and we had cows to milk. We had corn to feed to the hogs and things like that. So it was just a typical life on the farm. Everybody chipped in. Everybody had their jobs to do. Everybody had their work to do, and you just did it. That's just the way life was.
So you're born into a farm family?
Born into a farm family.
Which most farmers are generational.
They are. They are. They're about 2 miles up from where I live. There was a roller rink there. And so that's where all the kids went on Saturday night. And I went up there and went up to the banister, and I was 14-year-old. And I looked out there and I seen this girl, and I thought, wow. And she was skating around. She was a pretty good skater. And I was a good skater at that time too. I could do figure eights and all of that. So I got my skates on, went out there, and I come up beside her, and I said, "Would you care to skate with me?" She looked at me and said, "No, I don't want to." So I went on around, and I was like a peacock stretching its feathers. I did figure eights. I jumped and whirled around.
It's really showing off.
You bet, I was showing off. And she totally ignored me. So I thought, well, so I come up behind her while I was skating, and I put my skate and kind of pulled her skate back, and she kind of went down on the floor, you know. I very gallantly stopped, took her hand, lifted her up, started skating with her, and she jerked a couple of times, and then all of a sudden, we were skating partners.
The rest is history, right?
But that's how it started.
Didn't you like pick her up in a truck with no windshield in it or something one time?
That was our first date that we actually went out by ourselves. I had the only thing that was left for me to drive was an old 2-ton 52 GMC ton truck, or 2-ton truck. It had been rolled over. The back glass was broke out of it. The side glass was broke out of it. I had a chain wrapped around it. No muffler on the thing. And you got to understand, I was 14, almost 15, when I went to pick her up. And the gas tank had rusted out of it, and I had a 5-gallon gas can in the floorboard and a hose run through the firewall into that, and we had 2 of them. And so when I picked her up, she come out and she got in, and then took off down the road. And we just drove around and talked and visited, and just, I don't know, we just hit it off. But anyway, we was on the way back, the truck started sputtering and taking out because it was run down. Yeah, I said, Sandy, grab the hose and switch tanks. She just grabbed it, pulled it up out there, tossed it down the other. And I thought, you know.
You thought, wow, she could switch those tanks.
You bet you. So, I mean, it went from there. And
so you were 14 when you first started dating?
Yeah.
And you got married at what age?
I was 17.
So how many years have y'all been married?
56.
56 years, and you have 2 children.
Got 2 children, Terry and Paula.
And they're going to be with us later on in the show.
They're going to be with you later on.
Because they were like 14 and 12 when the Ristine elevator.
That's exactly right.
They've got a lot of memories of that, and we're going to reminisce with them later in the show. But really what kind of catapulted you into the agricultural movement was the American agricultural movement.
That's right.
So you didn't just wake up one day and start wearing the cap and the blue jeans. You were involved in the American agricultural movement.
In fact, I made a lot of fun out of them. They were talking about they was going to go on strike, and I laughed, and I said, Dad, if we get the crops out in time, let's just go on strike with them, you know, and that was my attitude. Mm-hmm. You know, our whole life was built around our farm and operation. But then I come from 𝚁𝚒𝚒𝚗𝚎, Colorado, and they was spreading out and speaking, and they'd invite other, you know, to.
That was a spokesperson, a membership, doing a membership drive?
He was one of the original that started
And he got you involved in the American agricultural movement?
Well, I went and I listened to him speak down at Dudley at the firehouse there. And he said a lot of things that really raised my curiosity and everything, and then it just went from one thing to the next till I think, you know, agriculture's got a problem. And from a lot of the things he said and what I realized was that we didn't have a production problem. We were good producers, we were good managers, we were conservative farmers and everything, but our debt load was increasing. The second thing he said was, farmers don't have a work ethic problem. They don't have a production problem. Agriculture has a political problem. And if we don't get involved in the political process and make the necessary changes, we're not going to survive. And that all made sense to me because back then, you know, money was easily available, but prices dropped, and we were substituting credit for profit.
So this got you this guy that come from El Campo, Colorado?
Right.
He kind of inspired you to be a part of the American agricultural movement because you felt like the farmers need to.
Jenkins was his name. He owned a bulk MFA plant there, supplied gas and fuel and everything to the farmers. But there was actually 5 of the farmers, and I don't know if we have time to get into it real quickly. But what's motivated them to get started, they were in a coffee shop, and they sat there drinking coffee, little town in southern Colorado. And they were sitting there griping and growling about how bad it was, and you know, the prices and the price of equipment and input cost. And there was a truck driver in there. And that truck driver got up and he come over to their table and he said, you know, he said, I drive coast to coast, and he said, every time I stop in a rural area to eat breakfast, get a cup of coffee, there's always a bunch of farmers sitting around griping and growling. He said, if you folks got a problem, why don't you do something about it or keep your mouth shut so I don't have to listen to you? Now that was what started the American agriculture movement. That trucker telling them farmers, if you got a problem, do something about it. If you're not, why don't you keep your mouth shut?
So instead of getting up and punching the guy, he's like, that guy's right. We need to do something about this.
As Alvin said, and one of them was a veterinarian and a farmer, and they were pretty substantial farmers themselves. But they, as Alvin said, you had 5 red-faced farmers looking at each other and saying, if he's right, we're going to do something. Let's do it.
He kind of shut them up, didn't he?
That's exactly right.
So Wayne, you were like your 1980 or 81 crop went to Ristine. Which one was it? Was it the 80 crop?
It was a 79 crop that we stored there.
So what kind of crop did you have that year? Was it a good crop?
It was a good crop, yeah. It was, of course, back then, 35, 40 bushel the acre was an exceptionally good crop.
Was it a good price?
We had a good price, but the price was going up, and that's the reason why we stored it actually as long as what we did, because usually we would market the grain, but it was really on the increase, and so we decided to hold the crop a while longer and sell it, but you know how you try to guess the market. You try to hit the top.
And this wasn't the first time you've done business with Ristine in 1981, right?
No, we've done business with them for years.
So it's not just like, I'm farming around 𝚁𝚊𝚒 in New Madrid. This is the first year I've took my beans there. You've had a long history with Ristine Grain Elevator.
We've done a business there for a long time.
So you had a pretty good crop that year. The price was okay, but you thought you could get more. So you said, Dad, I think we should store our beans in Ristine Grain Elevator like we always have.
Yeah, and that was a common business practice for us, is to haul beans over there and store them in the elevator. And we paid 1/8 cent a bushel a day for storage. And then we usually market them in the latter part of January, is usually dependent, but that's when we...
So you put them in storage and you got a CCC.
Warehouse receipt, yes.
And you got a loan on those beans to the U.S. government.
A crop loan. Soybeans at the time the elevator went bankrupt was worth over $10 a bushel. I had a loan for $4 and something. I don't remember just exactly.
What got you, like, during that crop year, you decided to store them in Ristine. What got you from my beans are safe in storage until I'm ready to sell them to I have no choice but to go in and physically remove my beans?
Right.
Walk us through that scenario.
All right. Well, at that time, I was acquainted with several of the people there in the Department of Agriculture there in Jefferson City. And I seen it on television that the Ristine elevator had went bankrupt. And so I called Tom Hopkins, who was head of the warehouse division, and he told him, I said, Tom, I said, what's going on? The elevator went bankrupt. And he said, well, Wayne, he said, don't worry. He said, we've been monitoring that elevator for quite some time, and when it became evident that they were going to remove grain without airing it on the records, said we went in, we padlocked the elevator, the grain is all there, and it's going to take a period of 3 or 4 weeks to get the red tape out of the way, and then you can be able to pick up your grain.
No big deal, you thought at the time, right?
I mean, everything, Tom assured me that everything was going to be fine, the grain was all there. And then the federal judge came in under the federal bankruptcy law. He contended the grain was in the elevator. The elevator went bankrupt, and they were going to sell the grain clear of all liens to pay off the debts of the elevator.
So Wayne, we've talked off camera. Give us a little background though on, the court system in Arkansas. It turned into like a little bit of a racket for bankruptcy cases, right?
Yeah, at the time, there was a lot of elevators going bankrupt because it was a tough time on agriculture, a tough time on everyone, Jimmy Carter put the embargo on, and the beans went from over $10 a bushel to down to right at $4 a bushel. And so it was just a tough time. And
It's before they were bonded and all that stuff, right?
well, they were licensed and bonded, but the problem with the bond, it doesn't cover 10% of what is actually in the elevator. So when the judge said that I'm going to sell the grain free and clear of all liens to pay off the debts of the elevator, that's when I started saying, hey, wait a minute. You know, that's not assets of the elevator, that's my private property. You know, I've got the warehouse receipts and all of that. And I started going to the hearings, and I mean, he was just adamant, we're going to sell the grain. They had the bankruptcy lawyers there, and they saying, Your Honor, we got to sell this grain because it's a perishable product, and if we don't, it's going to deteriorate. And so their goal was to sell the grain, put the money at the bank, and then start trying to figure out who it belongs to. Well, by this time, we had taken enough action that there was a farmer from Oklahoma called me. I don't remember his name, but what he said was, he said, Wayne, he said, the elevator that I had all my grain stored in went bankrupt in 1976. He said, Wayne, I lost everything I had because of it. And he said, I want you to think about something. You don't have anything to lose. You've already lost it. The only chance you've got is to get that grain back before they sell it. Because once they sell that grain, they put that money up in a pool, and it's like an ice cube. It starts melting. They deduct trustees' fees, attorney's fees, payroll. Then banks will come in and say, well, that money, because see, once they sell it, you're no longer talking about grain, you're talking about money. As long as you're talking about grain, who probably owns that? The farmer. But once you turn it into money, then the banks are claiming part of that money, and the fertilizer companies that they may owe, or whoever their debtors are, they start claiming that money and they start putting claims in on it. And so from the start, I said, I want determination of ownership before you sell the grain.
Mm-hmm.
I want to be able to prove that grain's mine and you return it, because if you don't, and what they explained, this farmer explained to me, he said they'll drag this bankruptcy out until they'll milk it till there's nothing left. And he said, well, he said they'll leave enough in there, and that's where you hear, well, the farmer got a nickel on the dollar out of the bank. What they say is that you got 100% of the settlement, you got 100%. The problem of it is, there's only 5% of what was originally started with, and you get 100% of what's left, which is nothing.
So the whole bankruptcy system in Arkansas was just a big economic machine for the judiciary.
Oh.
So it's not the first time.
It was an out and out racket.
But it's not the first time it happened.
No.
And the guy from Oklahoma was exactly right. Whatever he told you, you've already lost it.
I've already lost it. And the same lawyers, the same trustee, the same bankruptcy judge were just finishing up a huge bankruptcy. Only this time there was elevators, and it involved cotton gins and a lot of other things. And it was in Arkansas and Texas. So same setup, just different state.
Wayne, I think this is a great time to bring your kids into this segment. I want to welcome his kids to our next segment. Terry Cryts.
Glad to meet you.
Paula Kelly, welcome to the show. Very interesting. And it's been 40 years since your dad made that famous pilgrimage over to Ristine around New Madrid, Missouri. And how old were you, Terry, when that happened?
I believe I was around 14.
14 years old. Paula?
I was 12 years old.
So what was it like the day of, like when you knew your dad was going to go to Ristine and get those soybeans back?
It was frightful because we didn't know what was going to be happening. We had talked and planned, but you never know how it's going to be when you actually get there. And when we coming down the road to the elevator and seeing all of the support people there to support us, it made you feel better. But after you seen all the FBI and federal marshals, you still didn't know what was actually going to happen.
I mean, were you aware of what was going on at the time? I mean, did your mom and dad prep you a lot?
We had discussed it and decided how far we was ready to go. You know, Dad said, I can't just let him take what is mine away from me. If I have to go to jail, so be it. So we knew that was a possibility going in. But as far as the rest of it, we didn't know, is there going to be violence? Not, we just didn't know.
So Paula, that's a lot to lay on a 12-year-old, right? So
Yes.
when you woke up that day, you was like, yay, I'm not going to school, but I'm going to hang out with all these farmers.
Right.
So just the loading of the beans that day, do you remember any of that day's festivities? I don't remember much when I was 12 years old. So if you don't remember, that's fine. But
I very distinctly remember when we pulled up to Ristine and started getting closer, there was a line of federal marshals there. And my dad got out, talked to them, got back into the truck. It was me, my mom, my brother, and I in the truck. And he just started inching up towards the federal marshals and getting closer and closer. And I remember my mom putting her hand up on the dash and saying, Wayne, stop, because he was just getting closer and closer and they were not moving. And when she did that, I could kind of hear the fear in her voice, and that's when I knew that this was serious and it could get bad really quickly. At that point, in my mind, I was thinking, oh, we could all get shot here. So at that point, I was really scared at that time.
and that was probably quadruple the fear for a 14 and 12-year-old.
Right.
I can tell Terry was tough as a 14-year-old, though.
Right.
He probably wasn't really thinking about getting shot, but you were probably.
Well, I was worried about what could happen to us and the other people.
And like he said earlier, I mean, when we pulled up down there and all the people, it was amazing that people that we didn't even know showed up from hundreds of miles away to help my dad. And so that went a long way in making us feel better about starting out that day.
Yeah, you weren't going to be there alone.
Exactly.
So Terry, did you realize as a 14-year-old that the adults may be going to jail that day?
Probably somewhere in the back of my mind, but not like it would today if I was in a similar situation. Sure, the fear was there, but it was, when you're younger, you don't see all the sides or what could happen on everything.
So, yeah, because at 12 years old, you're thinking you might be thinking you're going to jail, right?
Yeah, we didn't know what to expect, and it was very tense at the time.
Someone made the analogy to me for people who don't know the Wayne Cryts 𝚁𝚊𝚒𝚝 story. I want to add your mom because she's the one that did all the work.
Right.
But, it's kind of like going to Busch Stadium to a parking garage, and the parking garage files bankruptcy, and they try to keep your car locked up, and they sell your personal car. So that's kind of what they did with your dad's beans.
Yes.
It's a lot for outside rural America to fathom what happened that day. I'm sure you had to explain it to your 12 and 14-year-old friends that, they stole your beans.
Right.
So it's hard for a 10, 12, 14-year-old to even imagine that, right?
Right.
So I guess y'all probably got to be local celebrities at school, right?
Yes, somewhat, but a lot of our neighbors was down there, and so a lot of the kids knew kind of what was going on. So
it's a community effort, even for the 𝚒𝚒𝐶𝐶 area.
yes.
Exactly. Yeah, they pretty much knew the story already. I mean, it was in the news so much that they kind of knew.
I hear all these stories about your mom driving a tractor. She did a lot of the manual labor. Your dad, even like when your dad was doing speaking engagements, your mom was like handling the farm.
My mom is the strongest person you'll ever meet. She really is. I mean, I don't think he could have done this without her.
Terry, what was the atmosphere like just at home in that time period, 1981, when all this was kind of brewing? What was the atmosphere at your house?
Well, there was a lot of tension, but tension not directed toward us. The family, we all knew where we stood, and we knew what was being done to us was not fair and was not right. But, the thing, what to do about it, and lots of meetings and discussions, and they finally come up with a plan of what they was going to do.
Your dad actually called a family meeting to see if y'all wanted he wanted y'all to be unified, and if y'all didn't want to do it, he might have not done it, right?
Well, this is true.
History would have turned out different.
Yes.
So do you remember that meeting, the family meeting?
I remember the last one that we had.
Yes, that's the one where if we do this, I'm willing to go to jail for what I feel is right. And we all agreed, yes, if that must come to that, then that's what we got to do.
And they gave us the choice, Terry and I, whether we wanted to be a part of it and be there with them or not.
Yes. 60 Minutes sent a film crew down, and they was wanting somebody to take them and show them the back ways to the burning elevator to beat the trucks there so they could be set up. So here I'm 14 years old. Dad said, well, he knows the back roads. You go with them, show them how to get there. So we got some kind of old, like a 70s Cadillac, and we're hitting the back roads, and we're in triple digits. And I'd have to scream, slow down, because this bridge, you know, it goes up, and then the bridge is like this, and then you leave the ground on the other side, so they'd stomp the brakes. Well, we got to Bernie and got set up, and probably about 15 minutes maybe before the truck started rolling in, when they got finished setting up to shoot. But no, leaving the elevator, seeing all the trucks, because they wanted to shoot the trucks leaving, so I had to stay behind. I think Mom and Dad and my sister rode in the first truck,
Right.
if I believe right. And then after all the trucks left, then they had to pack it up, and then we had to hit the road to get ahead of them before they got to the elevator.
I mean, what does your mom and dad, I mean, I'm sure they're your heroes, right?
Right, yes,
I mean,
they are.
They stood up for the little person, the family farm back then. What kind of pride do you look back on? Do you still get to talk about it with your friends and family? Does it come up a lot? Tell us about it.
Well, Mom and Dad, they've always worked together. As far as arguments and go, I'm sure they had some. They never brought any of that to me and my sister. And so they support each other, and they're there for each other, and they was always there for us. I mean, yeah, I mean, I did a lot of stuff wrong, trust me, I know this, but they took care of it. And if they hadn't, I don't know what I'd have done, how it had turned out. But no, I'm very proud of both of them.
They stood up for themselves, and they were standing up for other farmers too. You know, some of the laws that got changed helped other farmers down the line. And we're just very thankful for everyone that showed up to help them with what they were doing.
Well, Terry, Paula, I'll see you in 10 years at the 50th anniversary, okay?
That sounds good.
Thank you.
Appreciate it.
Thanks for coming. I would like to welcome Sandy Cryts to the show. We've interviewed her husband, Wayne, and her kids, and Sandy, it's your turn. Welcome.
Thank you.
Proud to have you.
Thank you.
It's been a long time coming. At first, you didn't want to be interviewed, but let's get into the story that you know so well. What led up to you and Wayne's decision to go in and get your beans? Or some people would say, steal your own beans back.
Yeah. Well, we owed quite a bit on the crop we'd grown the year before, and then those beans were to be sold and pay that debt off. And we knew that if they sold the beans and gave it to the other people that they owed money to, that we wouldn't have the money to pay off our debt. So we decided that that was the only way we could survive, was just to go in and get our grain. And
Sandy, on that historic day on February 16th, 1981, when you're getting ready to break the FBI line, many law enforcement there, what was going through your head at that time?
well, I was really worried about what Wayne was going to do, and I remember kept saying, Wayne, Wayne, Wayne. And he put the truck in gear, and we started rolling toward the federal marshals. They had a line across the road. And I can just remember saying, Wayne, stop, and he just kept going, and just as he got to them, they just parted out of the way, and I know I was just, I don't know what all I was thinking, except that he can't run over these people. But then I knew he said I wasn't going to run over anybody. And I said, well, I know that, but it was so tense that I was just scared, so scared as I've ever been.
Well, your daughter said that you almost like made fingerprints in the dash. Was it really that tense?
It was that tense, yeah. I mean, I don't remember so much of doing that, but she was sitting right beside me, so I guess she would know, you know.
She's got a pretty clear memory of that, so I think you're probably thinking
Yeah.
Wayne's fixing to run over somebody.
Yeah, that's what I thought. I thought, you know.
But as far as the federal law enforcement officers, what do you think was going through their head? Do you think this is not worth getting run over, or they always intended on getting out of the way? Did you ever find out what the real story was there?
Well, they talked a lot about, you know, they agreed with the farmers in that position. They said, you know, we're here to do a job. We have to do our job. And they said they was not going to stand in the way, physically stand in his way from going in and getting these grains. So they just stood back and let him go.
And y'all became good friends with a lot of these federal agents,
yes.
correct?
Yes, we did. Became good friends, close friends, and they were just super people. Everybody we dealt with down there just couldn't have been any better.
And that's one thing Wayne always preached is nobody's going to get hurt. He always gave law enforcement a heads up, and he wanted everybody to know what was going on, correct?
Yes, that's
He didn't want any surprises.
No, and then he wanted everybody to know that if they were there as part of his things he was doing, that if they'd start any violence, that they wouldn't be tolerated. They'd be asked to leave, or the police could take them, whatever.
Did you ever think that the law enforcement might be skeptical of Wayne since he was trying to do the right thing every single time?
I don't know. I think they respected him because of the way he handled things. And I don't know.
Was there ever any times with law enforcement that you thought, this is not good, that you were with Wayne?
No, down there, everything it went smooth. And of course, he was in the elevator office the whole time, and I was outside, and I didn't know what he was going through in there, but he went through a lot.
Well, it seems like to me that Wayne depended on you for a lot of advice, and he took your advice a lot. Most of the time, the spouse is the chief critic and chief cheerleader. Did you and him ever disagree on how this was handled?
No, when we first started talking about it, I said, Wayne, there's no way we can do that. We can't get those beans out of there. He said, there's a way we can do it. And I've never doubted him very much, but at that one time I thought, there's no way. And then we kept talking about it, and then we decided that was the only way. So
he brought you around to his way of thinking. He showed you, didn't he?
Yeah, he did. He did.
I know your husband thinks this and your kids thinks this, but you're one of the true heroes of this true story, because when Wayne was like in prison for, I think, 34 days and everything he had going on with this situation, somebody actually had to do the work, and you were actually running a farm and raising a family, correct?
Well, I did some, and he had his brother-in-law, after it got spring, time to farm, and that's when he was in jail, I think in April, but he took over the farming part, and I stayed down at Little Rock while he was in jail. And my sister and her husband stayed at our house with our kids so they could go to school, and do what they needed to do, and then somebody would bring them down on weekends to spend the weekend with us.
Well, since the judicial system was obviously against you and Wayne, throughout that time period, that 34 days that Wayne was in prison in Arkansas, did you think it's over, he's not getting out? I mean, was it doomsday for you, or was you optimistic?
There was a few times that we really, really wondered. Some of the trials was just unreal, but thankfully they all came out on our side. So, but at one time especially, I know Wayne and I were out in the lobby or in the hallway there waiting for the jury to come in, and we were talking about, well, if you're in jail a long time, or even I was charged too, but they dropped it on me. So their mom and dad, and his mom and dad would help us, with the kids and how we was going to do things. So it's pretty scary.
Y'all went through a lot of trials and tribulations. One thing that stands out to me is how great of a husband Wayne has been to you, and he's very loyal to his wife. I mean, I've spent some time with you the last 2 or 3 months. We've dined together, and I can just see that love affair still lasts today. But one inspiration to all married couples was, I think, that when Wayne wouldn't give the feds your wedding ring.
Oh, yes.
That had to mean a lot to you personally, too,
It
right?
did. And he's always told everybody that when we got married, we went on our honeymoon, and we just never came back yet. So that's our take on life, you just stay on that honeymoon.
I can kind of see that. Sandy, when the jury deliberated, Wayne come out in the hallway, and y'all kind of were going through many different emotions. He didn't know if he was going to be serving 20 years in prison or not at that time. What were y'all talking about out in the hallway when all this jury was deliberating and there was a chance he could go to prison for 20 years. What was going through your head?
Well, it was, like he said, it was a very trying time, and we were just talking about the kids and how they would be if he had to go to prison.
Because your own lawyer had Wayne convinced he was going to go to prison, correct? He didn't have much
Correct.
hope at that time.
No.
And that was a obstruction of justice charge by the feds.
Yes,
And that court was in Fayetteville, Arkansas.
yes,
And I can tell you still get emotional about it today because the thought of your husband going to jail and you being a single mother at the time, right?
yes, that's right.
So Wayne was come out though and was brave and strong. He thought everything was going to be okay, or he was trying to portray some confidence,
well,
right?
Yeah, he was telling us, we'd get through it, we'd have some help, we had both have family, and, we were just trying to do the best we could to stay sane, I guess at that point. We were just really upset.
Sandy, were you ever a witness in this case or against your husband? Of course, you probably can't testify against your husband, but were you ever a witness in any of the cases, or did you ever think you were going to prison?
Yes, I was on the witness stand for quite a while. I was charged too, but I think I took the Fifth Amendment 26 times, and I didn't have anything to say against myself or against Wayne, and I wasn't gonna. So I just, but it was a chance that we both could have ended up going to jail.
The emotion you and Wayne were going through at that time just had to be overwhelming.
It was really, really hard.
But that's a good point. You had a lot of community support. You had a lot of support from many different states. You had a lot of babysitters lined up throughout the world, right?
That's right.
And you had a very strong family foundation too. So you really weren't worried about the kids at that time, right?
No, I was just worried about Wayne at the time, and I knew the kids was being looked after, and I didn't have to worry about them.
So at that point in time, you had a community or a village of farmers that were looking after
That's right.
everything.
That's right. Farmers in our whole town was, supporting us.
When you got the not guilty verdict, how high did you jump?
Oh, I didn't. I just I slumped down in the seat. I didn't have the energy to jump at that point, but we were so thrilled. It was just unreal how good we felt.
So you're an instrumental part of this historic date, February 16th, 1981. It's been 40 years. What impact do you think Wayne and Sandy Cryts has had on this area, the state, and the world when it comes to agriculture?
Well, I think one thing that a lot of people said they saw, that if you would stand up for what's right and do it right, not protest and do like things are going now, but you just use some common sense and you can get things done. But you have to stick together if you believe in something. And I think still today we go somewhere and somebody will recognize Wayne, and they come up and talk to him, tell him, how much they admired him and appreciated him standing up.
I was in the crowd when Wayne gave one of his concession speeches when he ran for Congress, and it stuck with me my whole life. Wayne Cryts didn't know me from anybody. I was in a crowd of about 300 or 400, one that he lost, but he said, when you're right, you never lose. That stuck with me my whole life, and I've kind of lived by that. Many, many times in life you can be wrong or right, and nobody really knows about it. But like you said, you have to stand up for what's right. And when you're right, you never lose.
That's right.
Thanks for being here. I'm so glad we got you on the air because you are a very important part of history with the Ristine elevator, and we need to know what your perspective was. So thank you so much.
Yeah, you're welcome.
Sandy Cryts, thank you. Wayne, it was really nice visiting with your kids, Terry and Paula. They've got a lot of great memories of Ristine 40 years ago looking back. But I want to get back to February 16th, 1981. Okay. You made the decision to go get your beans.
Right.
Do you think you made the right decision? Is there anything you would have done different about that day?
There was no other decision to make except just give up and lose, lose all that we'd worked for. And so really, everybody always asks me, Wayne, if you had it all do over again, would you do anything different? Yes, I'd have sold the beans for the elevator went bankrupt.
Fortune teller, right?
That's exactly right. But no, after the decision was made, I mean, we were going to go as far as we could humanly go possible, and there was no question about it. As I look back, even all that we went through, no, I would have still made the same decision.
So once you broke through that barrier on February 16th, 1981, what kind of feeling did you have when you finally got through? Did you think, oh, I'm going to get my beans sold, we're headed to MFA at Bernie,
Yeah,
and I'm going to get these beans sold, and this problem is over?
that's right.
But it really just started.
It really just started. See, I made, the judge put out a court order that anybody accepted any of these beans would be considered part of the conspiracy. So whenever I got over to the elevator at Bernie, they had told me they couldn't accept, but if I could find a licensed grain dealer to sell through, that would relieve them of any responsibility. So what I had set up was that as soon as we got a few trucks loaded, they would issue me the check. My dad and my brother would take those to the Risco Bank and cash the checks and take enough cash to the ASCS office to pay off my loan. Well, when I come out of the elevator, you know, it was totally, it was like, I've got them in my possession now. But I was taking them over to Bernie, and I got the agreement with the federal authorities, because once we got there, the judge had put out an order that anybody had accepted any of these grains was going to be considered part of the conspiracy. Well, then MFA refused to accept them, even with my grain buyers. And so, boy, that really puts me in a bind. And I said, Glenn, you know, Glenn Young was the head of the FBI that took over from the federal marshals when I went through the line. And I said, you know, these people have been here so long. I said, we got to get this resolved. And I said, I need to make a deal where I can deposit this grain in the Bernie elevator, and that it will remain there until we have determination of ownership. So this was the agreement we made. And I brought in Notary Public, and we signed it, and the FBI signed it. So I thought I'd won the battle.
Was that against the judge's orders?
Well, what happened was that I needed to get the grain out of the trucks, because we got trucks from Michigan, we got trucks from Texas, and those people are needing to, you know, go back home. What they had to do, they called the chief judge of the 8th Circuit Court of Appeals in St. Louis, and they convened court. And this was probably 8, 9 o'clock at night. And the 8th Circuit Court of Appeals then overruled Judge Baker and ordered the MFA elevator to accept this grain. So that allowed me to put the grain in the elevator and all of that. And that allowed the farmers then to be able to go back to their various places.
But Wayne, at this point in time, you really thought you were going to get a determination of ownership.
Oh, yeah.
Something that really...
I had the written agreement that I would leave that grain in there until we had determination of ownership. So, and I wasn't worried. If I could go into court, I could prove that grain was mine.
It never happened though, right?
Never happened.
So your beans were at MFA Bernie.
Mm-hmm.
You thought they were safe.
Yeah.
You thought you were getting ready to get them back and cash them in.
Yeah.
Going to be farming the next year.
That's exactly right.
Then what happened?
Well, we sat down again, and I told Sandy, I said, I don't know if I can go through, you know, going back to that elevator and loading this grain up again. But I said, I'm going to try anything I can do. And then NJ Now called me, and he said, Wayne, they're coming over to load up the rest of the grain. And he said, Wayne, he said, I want to stop them. He said, would you be willing to come back and help me stop them from loading our grain out? And I said, sure, NJ. I said, I'll do that. So I went over there, and NJ Now pulled his Suburban halfway across the driveway, and I pulled my pickup across half of it. And we got out of the truck, and I raised the hood on the truck, and of course there was reporters there. They was keeping up with this story, and one of the federal marshals walked up and he said, "Wayne," he said, "what's the problem?" And I said, "Well, I pulled my truck up here and it took out on me." He said, "Well, what's the problem?" And I don't know why I said it, Barry, but I just pointed down. I said, "Well, it's got a bent dipstick." So anyway, the trucks come out of Arkansas, and of course we had the roadblock, and they pulled up there. And the federal marshal went and got on the steps, and he said, "I can't tell you folks what to do." But he said, if I was driving that truck, I'd probably turn around and take it back to Arkansas. So, I mean, they just turned around and went back.
And that's another side story. You got to be pretty good friends with these FBI agents and
They were,
the other federal agents there.
they were unbelievable. They were very, very professional. We treated them with nothing but respect and dignity, and they respected us the same way. But then I got a letter from the Commodity Credit and the FCS office informing me that my loan was due, and that if I didn't pay my loan off, I was gonna forfeit my grain. It infuriated me. I tried to pay them in cash, or I tried to pay them in check first. They refused it. Then over to the elevator when I was getting ready to unload my grain because I needed to pay off the loan. They refused cash. And so now they're telling me I'm getting ready to forfeit my grain if I didn't pay off the elevator. Well, they had stopped me from selling it. I didn't have the money at that time to pay off the loan. So what my decision was, I was going to go down and I was going to load up the grain. I was going to take it up to the ASCS office. I was going to run an elevator down the hallway, and I was going to start unloading beans and say, when you get enough beans to satisfy my debt, holler, and I'll take the rest of them and sell them. And that was...
So did you tell him you were coming?
I'm sure he was aware that I was coming. When I pulled up there at the trucks, I got out and I went in and I said, "George," I said, and so call my loan. In the letter, it said I could pay it off with cash, check, or the commodity itself. Well, I didn't have any money at that time. I mean, you can't believe. There's several degrees of poor, but there's only one degree of broke, and I was broke.
So you were really fixing to put a bunch of soybeans in the USDA office.
To put them down there, and then I got to thinking, Lord, everybody in there was friends, and it wasn't their fault. I mean, they were just accepting, and you know, I thought, Wayne, you can't, you know, them are your friends. You can't fill that place up with soybeans. So I told Joy, I said, Joy, I don't know what you want, but I said, I will haul these soybeans wherever you designate, whatever elevator, because I know you can't handle them here. And
Well, let's back up a little bit. We're jumping ahead. You had to take the ones at MFA Bernie by force to get them out.
what I did when I made the decision I was going to go in there, Eric Thompson was the president of MFA. And so I called Thompson, and I told him, I said, I've made the decision. I'm going to go in and get the grain. He said, Wayne, we've been expecting that. But he said, Wayne, we're under court order. And he said, if we give that grain to you, MFA is going to be in serious, serious trouble. But he said, we've talked to our attorneys, and they said, if you will go into the office and go up to the manager and say, I'm here to get my grain, and I'm prepared to use force if necessary to get it, but I'm going to take my grain, then he's going to just back off and say, hey, I'm not going to put any of our people in jeopardy of being hurt or anything, and we had no choice.
And after you got your beans out, there was no place to sell them. So all the farmers who had trucks there went and sold these beans for you somewhere in their name.
When I left the SCS office, because we had beans, you know, from each county, I told her, I said, I don't know what you want. I don't know what they're gonna require. When you decide, you just tell me. But I said, until that time, if I can get these beans sold, I'm gonna sell them because I got people I owe money to. The interest is accumulating on my unpaid debts in this loan. And I'm gonna start paying my debts. And if the time comes, you decide what you want, I'll do it. The judge put out an order then. Any elevator that accepted any of this grain anywhere would be considered part of the conspiracy. So I told by this time, it had even got past money. I mean, I said, just take this and scatter with it. And if you can sell them. And if you can get the money back to me. And I told Harley Centel, I said, I got one request, Harley. He said, what's that? I said, I want you to take 2 loads of these soybeans down to Arkansas. They're at Corning. That's where they're headquartered at down there. And I said, I want you to sell at least 2 loads to that elevator. Because I said, sometime they're going to, get elevators, that they got part of this grain. If they find out, they're going to bring them to court. And I'm going to go into Judge Baker's court and testify that I have no idea where all of this grain went, but I do know because I had the tickets and they marked on there where they come from. And I was going to tell the judge, 2 of these loads went to your elevator. So if all the other elevators are in trouble, you're in just as much trouble as they are because you took grain. And so that
So you took it to the James elevator at Corning, Arkansas? The one that filed bankruptcy, Ristine.
Yeah, but see, they had taken over and the trustee was managing it and things like that. And so they were still buying and selling grain and everything.
So 2 loads went to Corning, Arkansas, and you don't know where the other loads went?
They just scattered with them to various places.
But these people went and sold their beans in their name, and they brought you the money, correct?
They would call and they'd say, Wayne, we got something for you.
It's a brown paper bag?
Brown paper bag full of cash.
So Wayne, you had all this cash in brown paper bags. Probably not all of it was brown paper bags, but how did you deal with the IRS?
Well, I filed my taxes, but I didn't put any money or check in there because I didn't have anything to back it up. And so I started getting them real nasty letters, and they got more nasty. And then they ordered me to come to St. Louis and meet with them.
Oh, you actually had to go to tax court.
Yeah, up in St. Louis. Well, I don't know if it was a tax court, but anyway, when I went into the IRS office, I introduced myself, told them why I was there, and this lady, and I said, well, I want to pay my taxes, but I don't have any money. But I've got a commodity that you can seize, because I know the IRS seizes property to satisfy tax debts, and I got some soybeans. And she said, well, I don't know. And I said, well, I can put however many it takes in an elevator, and then you can, sell them, whatever. She said, well, let me talk to my supervisor. Well, the supervisor come out, and she listened to the story. She said, our district director's here. Come out. And so I just told him the whole story. You seize this grain, and then I'll put so much of it in there. And you're that soybean Cryts. He said, you're not dragging us into the middle of this. He said, Mr. Cryts, do you intend to pay your taxes? And I said, yes, sir. I don't know when, but as soon as I get money to pay them, I'm going to pay them. And he said, all right. And I never heard another word from him.
Wayne, you never did go to court over stealing your soybeans back. Never went to court.
That's what I anticipated, that I would be charged with the theft of my grain. I felt that I could go before any jury and prove that grain was mine. They never would charge me with theft. The first thing they charged me with was conspiracy. And the grand jury in St. Louis, which I had no part in or nothing, you're not represented. And the jury brought back a no true bill. And so at that time, I thought maybe it was all over with. The mayor of Gravette, Arkansas wanted me to come to Gravette and participate in their 98th annual Gravette Day festivities, be the grand marshal in their parade, and give a speech in the park. So I went down there, and George Pickett, he owned a Western store. And I was in there talking to him. There's a lot of other people in there, newspaper people, everybody was there, and we was talking, and the phone rang. Well, it was George Welch, one of the federal marshals I'd got to be good friends with at the elevator. He'd been transferred to Fort Smith as second marshal in charge. And he said, Wayne, he said, this is George Welch. He said, you need to get your tail end back to Missouri. He said, that judge and trustee are setting you up tomorrow at the Gravette Day festivities. And he said, they tried to get us to do it, and we refused to do it. And he's brought in a federal marshal from Brooklyn, New York. 𝚁𝚒𝚒𝚒𝚒 was his name. So anyway, when I hung up, I turned around to Pickett, and I said, hey, I just got an anonymous phone call that judge and trustee were setting me up here tomorrow. And I said, I don't want anything to happen to your festivities or anything, or have them interrupted. And I said, I'll just, go back to Missouri. And he said, Wayne, he said, we've advertised this. He said, there's people coming in from all over to hear you speak. And he said, it's really going to put us in a bind if you're not there. And of course, I knew it wasn't a crank phone call. He thought it was just crank. Mm-hmm. And I said, well, if they're going to do anything, they're going to do it sooner or later, and I just didn't get it over with.
He didn't know it was the most reliable source you could get.
So anyway, I had borrowed a van off of our Ford dealer to drive down there because I did, at that time, I mean, we were.
Yeah, Bud Shell, you said, really supported you a lot.
Bud Shell did. And so anyway, the next morning, I stayed all night with Bob Pickett and his wife. Next morning, went down there. And we was in his back office, and in walked the federal marshal. 𝚁𝚒𝚒𝚒𝚒 was his name, and he had a deputy with him. And he walked up to me and he said, "Are you Wayne Cryts?" And I said, "Yes, I am." And he said, "Well, I'm Federal Marshal 𝚁𝚒𝚒𝚒𝚒𝚒." And he said, "Do you have any money or valuables on you?" And I said, "Well, I've got my watch, my wedding ring, and my cowboy boot, and about $150 in my billfold." He said, "Well, I'm ordering you to turn them over to me." And I said, "Well, I'm not going to do that." And he said, "Are you refusing a direct order from a federal marshal?" I said, "Yes, sir." He said, "You do realize I am a federal marshal?" Because he's building his case against me. Mm-hmm. And I said, "Yes, I realize you are a federal marshal. And you're refusing the direct order." And I said, "Yes, sir, I am." I said, "All right." So he turned around and left, and I thought, well, was that all that's going to happen right now? Well, in come a guy running, he said, "Wayne, they're getting ready to tow your van off out front."
Which wasn't your van, it was Bud Shell's.
It wasn't my van to start with at that time. I went outside there, they were backing a wrecker up to my van, so I just stepped between the wrecker and the van. And boy, they backed her right up against me, and I just stood there, and finally they stopped. And the federal marshal come over and he said, "If you don't move," he said, "we're going to arrest you and take you to jail." And I said, "Well, I don't want to be arrested, but I can accept that better than what's happening to me." Well, the people were really upset because the word had went out that, hey, I was being set up. They already had heard that story, and then here it's happening. And they were really upset, and they were beginning to get loud. And I said, "Chuck," I said, "if you've got to arrest me, you better do it very quickly and quietly." Well, he done seen he was over his head in this thing. He said, "I tell you what," he said, "I need to make some phone calls." And I said, "Well, while you're making phone calls, let me go ahead and be the grand marshal of the parade, and then everybody will go on down to park." And then I said, "We'll do whatever we have to do after that." And he said, "That's fine." He said, "You got my word that we won't move the van until after the parade." So on the way down, Charlie Cooper, a guy that was with me, I took my watch, my wedding ring, my money and everything and give to him because I didn't want him getting penny off of me. Went through the parade. I got on the viewing stand when the float first one went through and watched it. Looked down there, there they were back in the wrecker up again at the van. So I went back and got between it. And he said, Wayne, he said, I'm getting ready to arrest you. And I said, well, if that's what you've got to do, that's what you've got to do.
Did you ever tell them it wasn't your van? They weren't really repossessing your assets?
I don't think it would have made any difference.
They're going to take it anyway. Their goal was to embarrass you.
That's right. That was one of their goals. So he handcuffed me and put me in the car, and he got in on the other side. The deputy marshal was sitting in the passenger side, and then the local sheriff's deputy was doing the driving. Well, instead of the people going on down to the park, I mean, here they came. I mean, it was, I mean, they were not happy with the federal marshal. And I kept telling him, I said, Chuck, you better get us out of here. Because I knew, you know, what if they didn't, because I'd been involved, you know. And finally, they got around the car and they were rocking the car. And all of a sudden, it made a big racket. And the local deputy sheriff, he said, that was James. James kicked our patrol car. He couldn't believe it. But that's how upset the people was. And I mean, they were rocking the vehicle. And finally, he kept bumping the crowd and got an open enough space that we took off. And they took me down to Fort Smith and put me in jail down there.
And you were in jail for what?
This was on a Saturday, Sunday, Monday. Then the head marshal come over to the jail, got me out of the Fort Smith jail, and took me over to the courthouse. And George Welch met me there at the door. And we went back and they fingerprinted me and mugshot me and put me in a holding cell. And in that holding cell, I could look down the hallway, and George Welch's office was on this side, and the head marshal was over there. And I seen George Welch, he come out the door, went into that head marshal's office, cussed him, I mean, for everything he was worth. Pretty soon he come carrying me a cup of coffee, and he was so mad, he was just shaking. And he put the coffee through the bars to me. And he said, Wayne, he said, if I wasn't so close to retiring, he said, I would quit and throw this badge or stick it somewhere, you know. But anyway, and so after that, then they taken me across to the courthouse. They arraigned me in federal court. I had no idea what I was being charged with. Hadn't talked to a lawyer, and here I'm being arraigned. It's the judge, the bailiff, and the prosecuting attorney is the only ones in that courtroom. And the judge said, Mr. Cryts, we want to know how you plead. I said, not guilty. The prosecutor said, not guilty. And I said, no, sir, not guilty. So they got up and conferred, and finally the judge says, I'm going to let you out on your own recognizance until we can set a trial date.
So you got out and you hired a lawyer to represent you in this case.
Right.
And your charge when you got to trial was what?
Obstruction of justice. And he kept trying to get me to plea bargain. He said, Wayne, he said, you're in an indefendable position. And he said, you're charged with obstruction of justice, refusing a direct order from a federal marshal. Did you do that? Yes.
So you were guilty?
Yeah. He said, well, I have no defense for it. And so I started telling him about, well, the judge that was setting me up, and you know, and he said, Wayne, that makes not one bit of difference, because they won't allow that to be entered into evidence. You're going to be judged. The jury's going to rule on, did you refuse a direct order from a federal marshal? And if you did, that's obstruction of justice. You're guilty. And he said, Wayne, I'm telling you right now, they're going to find you guilty. And if they do, son, you're going to serve at minimum of 20 years hard time. He said, do you have any idea what hard time means?
And you said, no, we're going to trial.
I said, we're going to trial. I said, I said, I will not plea bargain this. I said, I'm either 100% right or 100% wrong. There's no 40, 50%. And I want a 12-person jury. If they tell me I'm guilty, I won't like it, but I'll accept it. And he tried every way in the world to get me to plea bargain it, and I just refused to do it. So then we went to trial.
How long did that trial last?
About 2.5 days. And I mean, it was grueling. I mean, they brought in Bear Jackson, that was the best, had the best conviction record. And so anyway, the judge there, and I'm trying to call his name, I should have never forgot his name, but anyway, he's the same one. My judge in the trial is the same one that arraigned me in his court, but this is at Fayetteville.
So you have the whole Arkansas federal judicial system mad at you by this point, right?
Yeah. My lawyer said, Wayne, you have no idea what you've done.
And you have no chance.
No chance, 0 chance. And he, at one time, he called me, and if I didn't take his advice, he was going to quit. And I said, you know, if you quit, if I can't find a lawyer, I'll represent myself. And this was about 8 o'clock at night when he called me and quit. And I had a good friend that I went down when I was, anyway, when I got back, Sandy, and it was about 2 o'clock in the morning, said, Wayne, your lawyer, Bill Wilson, has been calling back. He said, whatever time you get in, he wants you to call. I started not to call, and finally I called him, and he said, Wayne, he said, I want back on your case. He said, I apologize for quitting. And I said, Bill, I know I need a lawyer representing me. I said, Bill, I had so much respect for you. I just wanted to let you know right now, if you want back on the case, you're back on. But I have no respect. And it really hurt him. I didn't mean to hurt him, you know, but it really hurt him.
And the jury was out for how long in this case? This is case number 1.
The case number 1, they were out for probably about 4 hours.
And they come back and said?
Oh, when the judge released the jury to go back, he said, ladies and gentlemen of the jury, this is a criminal proceeding. I will not accept a hung jury. It must be unanimous. But I'm telling you right now, if you come back with anything other than a guilty verdict, we just will throw all the laws out the window, everybody strap on a 6-gun and go down the street shooting. And that's the last thing the jury heard before they filed out. Well, he recessed the hearing. Sandy and I went out into the lobby, and I just backed up against the wall and just slid down. And she come over, and she knelt down. We was talking, and Bill Wilson come over and said, Wayne, he said, we will appeal this. And I said, no. I said, if that jury finds me guilty, I'll accept the penalty. And he said, well, I don't know what we would, appeal it on. And I said, I understand that. So I started telling Sandy, Mom and Dad will help. And of course, your mom and dad and the kids, and they're 14. But Barry, there's no way people can imagine what it's like when you're waiting on a jury to come back. And if they find you guilty, I mean, there's not any going home. There's not going home and hugging the kids. It's not hugging your wife. When they find me guilty, the judge is going to order the federal marshal to take me into custody, and I'm going directly into a jail cell. And you're sitting there thinking, 20 years, my kids will have, I probably won't get to see my grandkids more. But anyway, that's, and so here I am sitting there thinking about all that. Well, the jury comes back in. The judge asked the jury, have you reached a decision? Yes, Your Honor, we have. Would you pass that decision to the bailiff? The bailiff took it, handed it to the judge. The judge opened it up. He said, was this a unanimous decision? Yes, Your Honor. Are you positive this is a unanimous decision? Yes, Your Honor. Instead of handing it to the bailiff, he just throwed it. And the bailiff picked it up and looked at it, and he said, "The ladies and gentlemen of the jury find the defendant not guilty." Barry, you just, Lord have mercy.
Yeah, because you were guilty.
Yes, I was, I was guilty, but thank God for jury trials, you know. And, you know, at one point, Bear Jackson, he said, "Mr. Cryts," he said, "I want you to turn to the jury and for the first time tell them the truth. The only reason you've done all this stuff you've done is so you can run for politics." And I said, "Mr. Jackson," and I looked right at the jury, I said, "You know," I said, "I'm very proud of the battle I'm fighting. I'm very proud of my reputation. And I'm not going to run my reputation by becoming a politician." And so that was, and there were some other things that happened like that.
So when you get that court case behind you, you thought you're smooth sailing.
Over with.
Then all of a sudden you get another trial thrown at you.
Summons that I've been charged with criminal contempt.
So you went from obstruction of justice to criminal contempt.
Right.
How far apart was that?
Probably a month. And no, you went from it to, I mean, we won. It's over with.
You're back up on the roller coaster.
Yeah.
Now you're back down.
I'm back down again, right in it again. And 𝚁𝚒𝚒𝚗 and my lawyer, Bill Wilson, again, he said, "Wayne, you won that." But he said, "There's no way you're going to win this second one." 𝚁𝚒𝚒𝚗 in 1976 was voted the outstanding federal trial judge in the nation. And he said, "Wayne, you've got to let me plea bargain this one." And I said, "No, Bill, I haven't changed my mind. You know." And it's not double jeopardy because they're charging me with different things. They're not charging me with the same crime. Mm-hmm. So anyway, he said, "Okay." But he said, "I tell you," he said, you won that one, but you will not win this one." And one of the preparations was, I had done hours of depositions, you know, they just questioned. Mm-hmm. And he had all these boxes on his desk, and we were making preparation for trial. And he said, "Wayne," he said, "I want you to take all of these boxes home. I want you to study everything you've said, because they're going to try to trip you up in these depositions. You said this here, and now you're saying this here and everything." And when he got done, I just took the boxes and shoved them back. I said, "Bill, I don't need those boxes." He said, Wayne, you got to understand how important this is. They're going to try to trip you up, make it look like you're lying." I said, "Bill, I don't need those boxes. When you tell the truth, you don't have to remember what you said." And he just, okay.
Well, how long did this trial last?
Oh, it was about the same amount of time.
Just 3 days, 3 or 4 days?
And the only thing, this time they subpoenaed my dad as a government witness against me.
So your dad was testifying against you, they thought?
Yeah, that's right. Their thinking was, if the jury seen my dad testifying against me, then, you know, I've got to be really guilty for that. So Dad got on the stand and they said, "Mr. Cryts, at a certain day, at a certain time at Ristine, Missouri, did you see your son take these beans out of the elevator?" Now that was the question. He said, "You know, at the time you're talking about, I had cataracts, and I had cataract surgery shortly after that, and I just can't really testify what I seen that day."
He couldn't see or remember anything,
He
could he?
couldn't see or he couldn't remember anything.
He was a really good witness against you, wasn't he?
Yeah. And so anyway, we went through all the trial. At one point, they had the prosecutor, he asked me to read this deal out of the newspaper, and I started reading it. Lord, my lawyer got up and he objected, you know, and all of this. And what it talked about in there was a previous arrest I had at Gravett, Arkansas. Well, that's not allowed in your trial because it could prejudice the jury, you know, for your back then. So the judge ordered the prosecutor and my lawyer into his chambers, and I said, "I don't want you I don't want you going back in the judge's chamber. He said, gosh, Wayne, he said, I got to. The judge has ordered me back in his chamber. And I said, Bill, you work for me. You're not working for the judge. And I'm telling you, I don't want you to go back there. He said, Wayne, I got to. I'll be found in contempt of court. And I said, okay, I'll just fire you. That'll leave you out. Why? You can't fire me. I said, if you go back there, I will, Bill. He said, what am I going to tell the judge? Tell him I don't trust you. And they're going to make a deal. I know what you're going to do, and it's not going to happen. Oh, gosh, Wayne. So he went up to the judge's bench and looked up. And he was whispering to the judge, and I mean, you could see the color come up his neck. And he sat there quite a while, and he said, Mr. Cryts, he said, if I allowed you to come back into chambers with the attorney, the prosecutor and your attorney, would you be willing to do that? I said, yes, Your Honor. So I went back there, and of course the lawyer and the prosecutor, they was, going back and forth, and the judge was sitting there listening, and he just stopped him. He said, you don't want a mistrial, do you? I said, no, Your Honor. I said, I want this jury to decide whether I'm guilty or innocent. I said, all right, let's proceed. And
The one time the judge was on your side, right?
he ruled on my, that's probably the first time in all the legal proceedings I went through that the judge ruled in my favor. And when the jury come back and found me innocent, I knew it was over with this time. I knew what else are they going to do? But anyway, that's where I found out there was a higher power than a federal judge. The judge got so mad that he actually cursed the jury. And of course, the newspapers wrote that up. And the next morning in the paper, his mother, the judge's mother, she said, I was so ashamed of my son for his conduct in the Wayne Cryts trial. And so the judge apologized in there to the jury in the paper. He said, when you're against a 12-person jury and your own mother, maybe I was wrong in my conduct. And so then he said, he dismissed the jury and everything, and then he turned to me and he said, Mr. Cryts, he said, I'm going to charge you with civil contempt. And he said, I'm going to fine you $300,000 and some odd to accumulate at $10,000 a year at 10% interest. And so that fine was levied, and I said, well, Your Honor, I want a jury trial. And he said, there will be no jury trial. This is not a jury offense. So, there I went. And then that started all the legal business of them trying to find any properties that I had, anything that they could take to satisfy the judgment that the judge had just ruled against me. Well, when we left the MFA elevator, Mr. Young, the head the FBI, he said, Wayne, he said, they're going to come after you if you've got anything in your name, whatever. He said, I'm telling you, you got to get it out. So I got an attorney and my accountant, and we put our house and everything in a family irrevocable trust, which there was no liens that they against it or anything like that. So the minute that I got that signed and got it recorded, then my house was safe from them.
So Wayne, you were fined for contempt in court.
Right.
You were put in jail for contempt.
That is correct.
You were supposed to hand over the names of all those farmers who helped you in court, in bankruptcy court.
That is correct.
Those names that the FBI and the federal agents already made a list of when they come out of Ristine.
They had everybody's picture, name, license plate number, the whole thing.
So they put you in jail for something that they already had.
all the answers to.
You were in jail for 32 days.
That's correct. And Judge Baker, I was on the witness stand, and they were ordering me to name the farmers and the people that had helped me. And I said, Your Honor, I cannot answer those questions. And he said, if you don't answer those questions, he said, I'm going to put you in jail for contempt of court. And do you understand what contempt of court is? We're not putting you in there to punish you. We're putting you in there to coerce you to answer this court's questions. And as long as you remain stubborn, you will remain in jail forever. Do you understand?
Indefinitely.
Indefinitely. So he told the lawyer, you take him out and explain what's fixing to happen to him. So the lawyer did. I went back in, and he said, I'm ordering you to name the people that helped you. And I said, Your Honor, I don't know the proper wordage to use, but I want to take the Fifth Amendment. He had a pencil in his hand. He drew back and he throwed the pencil clean across the courtroom, and he sat there a little while. He said, I'm going to recess this hearing till I can get a ruling from the Attorney General whether you can take the Fifth Amendment or not. So they recessed the hearing. A week or so later, they called it back, put it back on session, put me back on the stand, and the judge said, Mr. Cryts, he said, you've been granted immunity to prosecution. Do you understand what that means? That waives your Fifth Amendment rights, because anything you say is not going to be used against you. You name the people that helped you and you can go free. Do you understand that? And I said, yes, Your Honor, I do. He said, all right, I'm ordering you to start naming the farmers. And I said, Your Honor, I mean no disrespect to you or your court, but I cannot in good conscience, and that's as far as I got. He turned to Mr. White and he said, Mr. White, you will take Mr. Cryts into custody, you will incarcerate him, and he will remain in jail until he purges himself of contempt of court.
And this is the list that they already had.
Oh, they knew everybody that was there. And my lawyer was sitting there during this looking at the list of all the names. All of it. But anyway, that's what happened.
So Wayne, we're sitting here 40 years later. How do you think you were treated by the judicial system, federal agents?
I have nothing but respect for every law enforcement officer I'm in. Everything from the deputy sheriffs to the highway patrol to the federal marshals to the FBI. They even brought in Bob Harr, that was the top federal marshal in the United States. He was the one that I shook hands with at the elevator, and they'd give me the court order. I have nothing but praise for those people.
You always had a meeting with law enforcement before you did some type of protest. Yeah.
I believe in our political system. If I, as a citizen, believe I'm unjustly treated, or a group of people, they have the right to protest that. But all that protest is to bring attention to your problem. Once you have, you establish, hey, we've got a legitimate problem that needs to be addressed, that's when the hard work starts. You've got to go to Washington, D.C. You've got to find people, the congressmen and senators that will introduce legislation. You've got to get the votes. You've got to get the bill introduced, or whatever it is that resolves what your problem is. And then you work through that judicial or the political system to solve the problem. And that's always been my philosophy, is that if you've got a problem, draw attention to it, try to get the support, to get the votes to alleviate or get it rectified.
So Wayne, on this historic anniversary of Ristine Elevator, the emotions you've got running through your head, that's looking way back, is there anything you would have done different? Do you have any regrets? How did it change your life? Because it really set your life on a different pattern.
I don't regret that decision. You can question decisions you make. But Barry, I had to just make one decision right after the other under extreme pressure. And I made the very best decision that at the time that I knew to make. And I made that decision and I went with it. And I could look back, well, if I would have done this, would it turned out better or would it turned out worse? But I accomplished a lot of the things that I wanted to accomplish. I got the grain out. The price had dropped considerably, but I was able to pay off my debt, and we were able to keep farming until 1987. And because of a lot of different factors and everything, that we had to give up our farming operation at that time. And there was no way that I was going to declare bankruptcy. We had land that had nothing against it. It was free and clear. We hadn't borrowed against it or anything. But at the time, the amount of money that I owed with the prospects of being able to continue the operation under what it was, I literally had to make a business decision. And I got my dad, my brother, and everybody together, and I said, you know, I think we've gone as far as we're going to be able to go. We can continue to farm maybe another year or two, but even at that time, we couldn't borrow money. The judge, if we put money anywhere, and not only that, of course, we haven't got time to go into it now, but I had to take my grain out of the elevator on my 81 crop. The judge tried to confiscate the crop that I was planting while all of this stuff was going on. So we made it, and I was able to sit down with Van Gibbs that we owed a crop loan to, worked it out with him. We had some land that we didn't owe any money, and so I didn't trade money. And then we had a first with Equitable Insurance out of New York, first on some of our land. I worked it out with them, and I was able to piecemeal. But I tell you, Barry, when they talk about a family farm, when you take 80 acres or something, it's like taking your arm off, and you know, I mean, it's almost like losing a family member when you lose it just means that much to you.
And that's what they caused for you back in 1987, right?
Yeah.
They just wore you down over time.
They financially strangle you till you can't move, and they keep on. It's just one thing after the other.
Can you step back and look at your place in our American history, Missouri history? I mean, what does that mean to you? Ristine 40 years later, are you able to step back and say, I was part of that?
I was part of that, and something else that our family sat around and talk about is we are so concerned about where our country's at right now and where it's headed. Sandy and I are very fortunate. I mean, we're going to be able to make it the rest of our time. I'm so concerned about my kids and my grandkids, and I've got 5 great-grandkids. I'm so concerned about what they're going to be in, and I still want to get out there.
You still got the fire.
The fire is there, and I just, that's the hardest part, is almost feeling like I'm helpless. I'm almost 75-year-old, but I'd be out there in a minute if Barry, I've got something. I'm our people that fights for change, and I'm you, and I'd like to present you with this jar of soybeans, and these are some of the actual beans that come out of the elevator.
So it wasn't 33,000, it's 33,000 minus this.
Minus that jar right there.
Well, I really appreciate that. It was supposed to be, wait a minute, it was perishable. They're not supposed to be here.
Yeah, pretty good shape for 40-year-old soybeans, isn't it?
40-year-old soybeans, wow. That's
now, there
iconic.
may be a 𝚑𝚑𝚑 in there too. So anyway,
well, thank you very much.
I do appreciate people like you that are working for change. And I think we all see that we still have a political problem in agriculture. And the farmers have got to get involved in that political process.
Well, farmers are the least united occupation in the world.
Yes,
I mean,
the independent,
yes.
when they say, and that has its goal, it has its pluses, but they have got to unite and deal with the political problems, because they're becoming less in numbers all the time. And people, They still get their food at the grocery store, and they get connected to the farm.
That's a good point. They say there's strength in numbers. Our numbers are going down every day. But Wayne, leading up to this interview, I actually had to refresh my memory since I was about 12 years old. But I actually read the book, One Man with Courage, but leading up to this interview. So I got to refresh my memory on many of your stories. And it's a really, really good book. Anybody wants to know the true Wayne Cryts story? And I tell my friends that almost everybody in our office has read this recently. We've just been handing it around, but not that it's boring to me, but it actually skips a lot of your childhood. And after the Ristine, it actually focuses pretty much on Ristine.
That's correct.
So it's action-packed as soon as it starts. So I forget the guy's name. Jerry Hobbs wrote the book. He done a great job covering this story, and I recommend this book to anybody in agriculture. And it's a big part of Southeast Missouri history. It's a big part of American history. Wayne, thank you for being with us today. It's been a pleasure.